He fired me across a table polished with other people's obedience. By the time the doors closed behind me, 22 of them were already standing. I learned that power prefers quiet rooms. The boardroom sat at the top of the building, glass on 3 sides, a ceiling high enough to remind you who owned the sky. The table was imported wood, rare, expensive, treated like a shrine. Men like my father-in-law believed money should be visible. He believed fear should be subtle. He didn't raise his voice when he fired me. He didn't need to. "Thank you for your contributions," he said, fingers steepled, eyes flat. "This company is moving in a different direction." Different direction. That's how men like him end careers, marriages, and ethics, by pretending momentum absolves intent. I nodded. I had learned patience from him. I had learned not to react. My badge was already deactivated. Of course it was. He liked efficiency. He liked control wrapped in courtesy. The security director stood near the door pretending he wasn't there for me. I stood, smoothed my jacket, looked around the table. 23 faces, some loyal, some afraid, some quietly furious. I met each pair of eyes and held them a half-second longer than comfort allowed, long enough to say, "You saw this?" My father-in-law, billionaire CEO, architect of charitable facades and offshore rot, smiled thinly, satisfied. He believed this was the end of me. He believed humiliation finished people. He had always underestimated patience. I walked out without a word. In the elevator, my hands were steady. That mattered. I refused to give him the pleasure of tremors. The doors closed. Silence. Then the soft sound of another presence. One of them had followed me. "Wait," a voice said. Then another. By the time the elevator reached the ground floor, 22 people stood behind me. No speeches, no drama, just bodies choosing integrity over payroll. That was the moment I understood something important. He had money. I had witnesses. I married into power the way some women marry into weather. You don't challenge it. You learn its patterns. You learn when it destroys quietly and when it announces itself. You learn that smiles are strategy and generosity is leverage. My husband was the gentler version of his father. That should have warned me. Men who grow up under tyrants learn 2 skills early: imitation and concealment. The company liked to call itself a family. That was the first lie. Families don't require NDAs. Families don't punish dissent with silence and severance. I was hired on merit. I stayed through loyalty. I was fired for proximity. When you marry a man like him, you don't just gain a spouse. You inherit enemies who haven't met you yet. I had seen the fractures for years. Numbers that didn't align, donations routed through shells, acquisitions that smelled like laundering dressed in compliance. I asked questions, carefully, professionally. I documented answers. That was my real mistake. Curiosity is tolerated in women only when it flatters men. The firing was swift because it was overdue. He had waited for the right optics. He always did. He waited until quarterly results were strong, until the board was distracted by growth, until my husband was conveniently overseas. He believed isolation would break me. It didn't. It clarified me. The media didn't notice the walkout at first. Billionaires control noise the way conductors control orchestras. What they can't control is silence when it spreads. 22 resignations landed on HR's desk within 48 hours. Key departments, strategic roles, people who knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically and otherwise. The stock didn't fall. Not yet. He called my husband that night. I wasn't in the room, but I heard enough. Power doesn't whisper when it's offended. "You married a liability," he said, voice bleeding through the phone. "Fix it." My husband didn't defend me. That mattered too. Loyalty reveals itself under pressure. So does cowardice. I slept alone that night for the first time in years, not because he was gone, but because something else had left with him. Illusion. Revenge is often imagined as fire. Loud, immediate, satisfying. That's childish. Real revenge is accounting. It's patience sharpened into structure. It's waiting until the right people are listening. People who don't fear billionaires because they regulate them, prosecute them, or dismantle them piece by piece. I didn't need to fight his power. I needed to expose its source. I spent weeks saying nothing publicly. That unsettled him more than outrage ever could. Silence invites paranoia. Men like him fill it with their own guilt. I organized documents, timelines, emails, ledger inconsistencies. I didn't steal anything. I didn't hack. Everything I had was obtained legally, ethically, and deliberately. He taught me that. "Never do anything you can't defend in daylight," he once said at a gala, raising a glass to applause. I intended to test that philosophy. The 22 met with me individually. Quiet cafes, lawyers' offices, park benches. They were afraid. They were also done. I didn't promise protection. I promised truth. Some of them cried, some of them were angry, a few were relieved, all of them were necessary. When loyalty trumps money, empires shake. We didn't leak to the press. Not yet. We went higher, regulators, financial crime units, international compliance boards, people whose job it is to dismantle untouchable men, the kind of people billionaires fear but never respect. I didn't frame it as revenge. I framed it as cooperation. That language matters. My father-in-law made his first mistake 2 months after firing me. He underestimated time. The second mistake came shortly after. He underestimated me. By the time he realized the doors were closing, he was still counting exits he no longer owned. But that comes later. For now, understand this. I did not become powerful by screaming. I became dangerous by listening. And everything he taught me about control, discipline, and patience, I learned perfectly. Just not for him. Silence is never empty. It's full of people deciding what they're willing to lose. The morning after the walkout, my phone didn't ring. No threats, no apologies, no frantic damage control from the company that liked to brand itself as humane. That told me everything. They were waiting to see if I would blink. I didn't. I made coffee, black, no sugar, sat at my kitchen table and opened a legal pad. Paper still matters when you're planning something that will outlive digital excuses. At the top, I wrote one word: sequence. Revenge without sequence is noise. Justice without sequence collapses under scrutiny. I wasn't interested in either. I was interested in inevitability. My father-in-law had always believed control was about timing. He taught that lesson often, usually to rooms full of people too well paid to challenge him. "Strike when the narrative is tired," he'd say. "People don't resist endings." So I gave him one. Publicly, my firing was already old news, a quiet executive reshuffle, a personal decision. That phrase does a lot of unethical heavy lifting in corporate America. Privately, the company was hemorrhaging competence. 22 departures don't just remove labor, they remove memory, process, context. They leave behind gaps no consultant can fill. He blamed me for that. I knew because he couldn't help himself. The first indirect message came through a mutual contact, a board-adjacent acquaintance who still thought neutrality was a moral stance. "He says you manipulated them," she said carefully, "that you poisoned loyalty." I smiled when she told me, men like him believe loyalty is transferable, that it moves with money like a commodity. The idea that people might choose principle over comfort offends them deeply. Good. My husband moved out 3 days later. He didn't say why. He didn't have to. He packed quickly, efficiently, like a man following instructions he didn't write, but understood perfectly. At the door, he hesitated. "You didn't have to do this," he said. I looked at him. Really looked. "You mean I didn't have to survive?" I replied. He didn't answer. That was the last conversation we ever had that mattered. I began meeting with regulators the way other women meet friends for brunch. Quietly, methodically, always prepared. I never led with accusations. I led with questions. "Can you explain why these transactions route through 3 subsidiaries with no operational staff? Is this standard compliance for charitable donations exceeding this threshold? I'm confused about how this acquisition passed due diligence given these filings." Confusion is disarming. It invites explanation. And explanations create records. I brought documentation, but I never pushed it forward first. I let them ask, let them request, let them believe they were uncovering something on their own. That mattered more than you think. People protect discoveries they believe they made. The first official inquiry didn't target him directly, it targeted one of his foundations. That was intentional. You don't pull a pillar from the center of a building. You test the edges, you find the load-bearing lies. The foundation was his pride, his public absolution, the place he pointed when critics whispered. When auditors started asking questions, he laughed it off. Charitable compliance reviews were routine, but routine doesn't usually involve cross-border forensic accountants. He called his legal team, expanded it, paid more. That was his second error. He thought money could still outrun scrutiny. It can't. Once the right people are bored enough to focus, I stayed invisible. No interviews, no social media statements, no resilience posts wrapped in curated strength. That kind of performance cheapens the outcome. Instead, I listened. People talk when they think you're finished. Former colleagues reached out. Vendors, consultants, even competitors. Not to console me, but to align. That surprised him too. Power isolates. Its collapse creates opportunity, and opportunity attracts honesty. One evening, 6 weeks after the firing, I received an envelope. No return address. Hand-delivered. Inside was a single flash drive and a note. You were right. I'm done protecting him. No name. No explanation. I didn't open it immediately. Impulse is how traps work. I waited 3 days. Then I brought it to an attorney who specialized in financial crimes so complex they read like fiction. We reviewed it together. It was real, meticulous, devastating, and still incomplete. Perfect. Incomplete truth invites investigation. Complete truth invites suppression. I preferred momentum. By the time the first subpoena was issued, he knew my name was attached to something. Not publicly, but in rooms where tone shifts and smiles die quietly. He tried to reach me then. Not directly. Never directly. A former mentor called. He wants to talk, she said. To clear the air. I declined. Air doesn't need clearing when it's already poisonous. Then came the threat disguised as concern. You're burning bridges, someone warned me. This industry is small. I thanked them for the information. Industries don't scare me. Systems do, and systems were finally paying attention. Here's the truth. No one tells women who challenge powerful men. You don't win by being louder. You win by being undeniable. I didn't need sympathy. I needed alignment. I didn't need revenge. I needed documentation. And I didn't need to destroy him. I needed him to face people he couldn't charm, intimidate, or buy. That takes time. I had plenty. Because when a man fires you thinking it's the end, he rarely notices you've been preparing for the beginning. Power doesn't panic when it's threatened. It panics when it's documented. The first subpoena arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Not at headquarters, at one of his satellite entities. Small, deliberate, almost polite. He called it a nuisance. That's what men say when the math hasn't reached them yet. I found out because someone forwarded me the internal memo meant to control morale. Routine inquiry, full cooperation, no operational impact. That sentence alone told me he was lying to himself. Routine inquiries don't require outside counsel with international reach. They don't require weekend meetings. They don't trigger document retention notices written in legal language so sharp it draws blood. And they don't wake men like him at 3 a.m. He tried to reassert control the only way he knew how, by tightening it. Suddenly, former colleagues received calls reminding them of their non-competes. Vendors were pressured to reconsider relationships. A junior analyst who had resigned with the group was threatened with litigation over a slide deck he hadn't even created. That was mistake number 3. Fear works only when people believe you're still untouchable. He was no longer untouchable. He was just loud. I told the 22 nothing. I didn't need to. They were already watching the pattern shift, already sensing what happens when predators realize the terrain has changed. One of them, quiet, brilliant, never showy, sent me a single line. He's scared. I closed my laptop and let myself breathe for the first time in weeks. I didn't enjoy it. That's important to understand. This wasn't pleasure, it was confirmation. There's a difference. My husband filed for divorce shortly after. The paperwork was aggressive, punitive, filled with language designed to exhaust rather than resolve. He wanted to remind me that he still belonged to a powerful family. That access could be revoked. That comfort was conditional. I read it once. Then I handed it to my attorney and told her to take her time. Rushed responses reveal anxiety. Calm delays create doubt. I had learned that from his father. The regulators escalated quietly. What began as financial compliance broadened into governance. Governance widened into oversight. Oversight invited questions no one wanted to answer on the record. The flash drive turned out to be the first of 3. The second came from someone higher up, someone who had believed the myth for years and finally realized belief doesn't protect you when investigations start naming names. The third came from a place I hadn't expected at all. A bank. Banks don't have consciences. They have risk thresholds. He had crossed one. I was invited to provide context. Not testimony, not yet. Context. That word should terrify anyone who survives on obfuscation. I walked into that meeting with nothing but a notebook and my memory. I didn't need theatrics. I didn't need emotion. I needed clarity. They asked how long I'd suspected misconduct. I answered honestly. Years, but suspicion isn't proof. It's only preparation. They asked why I hadn't reported it earlier. I met their eyes. Because I wanted to be certain, and because when you speak too early, you get dismissed. When you speak at the right time, you get heard. No one challenged that. They knew it was true. Here's what people misunderstand about billionaires. They don't fall because of one scandal. They fall because of accumulation. Each exemption, each exception. Each time someone cleaned up after them because it was easier than confronting them. I wasn't the storm. I was the ledger. He reached out again, this time directly. A text, short, controlled. We should talk. This has gone far enough. I didn't respond. When men like him say far enough, what they mean is, I'm uncomfortable. Discomfort is not my problem. The press started circling. Still nothing published. Just inquiries, just interest. Just enough to keep his communications team working overtime crafting statements no one had yet asked for. That's another tell. Innocent people wait for questions. Guilty people prepare answers in advance. The 22 were offered incentives to return. Promotions, retention bonuses, quiet apologies that never reached the ear of accountability. None of them accepted. Loyalty, once clarified, doesn't reverse easily. That refusal hurt him more than the subpoenas. Money failing is an insult. People choosing differently is an injury. One night, late, I stood at my window and watched the city settle. Lights going out floor by floor, offices emptying, systems resting. This was the part no one sees. Not the boardroom, not the downfall headlines, not the courtroom steps, the waiting, the discipline of not acting when ego demands spectacle. I thought about everything he had taught me, about leverage, about patience, about letting others reveal themselves. He had been an excellent teacher. He just hadn't realized I was paying attention. There's a moment, right before a structure fails, when everything goes quiet. No alarms, no collapse, just a subtle shift in pressure that only engineers and predators recognize. That's where we were. The regulators didn't announce escalation. They never do. Escalation arrives disguised as additional requests, more documents, older records, questions that reach further back than anyone planned for. History is dangerous when you've been rewriting it. He tried to preempt the narrative. A philanthropic announcement hit the wires early Monday morning. A new initiative. 7 figures, children, education, the usual absolution package. I watched it without reaction. Public generosity is often a time distraction. It doesn't work when investigators are already counting. By noon, 2 outlets had quietly declined to run the piece. Not because they were virtuous, because they were cautious. Someone had warned them off. That told me something important. The circle of awareness had widened. My husband's attorneys requested mediation, not because they wanted peace, because they wanted silence. They offered a settlement generous enough to tempt a woman who still believed money equaled security. Assets, real estate, a confidentiality clause thicker than the rest of the document combined. I read it slowly. Then I slid it back across the table. No, I said. That was all. They blinked. Men in expensive suits aren't used to single-word refusals from women they've categorized as manageable. You should consider the implications, one of them said carefully. I have, I replied. That's why the answer is no. Silence stretched. I stood. The meeting was over. That night, the first internal suspension happened. Not him, never him. Someone lower, someone expendable. That's how hierarchies protect themselves, by sacrificing proximity. The press framed it as accountability. I recognized it as panic management. The person suspended reached out to me 2 days later. I did what I was told, they said. I didn't think, I know. I said, and meant it. Systems don't thrive on villains. They thrive on obedience. The investigation crossed borders. That's when the real fear set in. Domestic influence has limits. International scrutiny doesn't care about reputations built at charity dinners or golf courses. Different languages, different laws, different appetites for consequence. His legal spend doubled, then tripled. The board stopped returning his calls immediately. Delay is how loyalty erodes. He sent an email, longer this time, polished, emotional in the way men think emotion works. We are family. Whatever conflict exists should stay private. There are consequences to public damage you may not fully understand. I read it twice, then I archived it. Threats wrapped in paternal language are still threats, and I understood consequences very well. The 22 became 40, not all resignations. Some were whistleblowers. Some were quiet cooperators. Some were people who had waited years for permission to stop lying to themselves. I never asked them to come forward. I didn't have to. Once inevitability enters a system, people choose the side that will still exist when it's over. I was asked, again, to testify, this time formally, under oath. I said yes without hesitation. Truth doesn't fear structure. The night before, I slept deeply. That surprised me. I expected nerves, anger, anticipation. Instead, there was calm, the kind that comes when you've already done the hardest part, deciding not to look away. In the room, across from people who didn't smile easily, I answered every question the same way. Precisely. No embellishment, no editorializing, no self-pity. Facts don't need emotion to be devastating. At one point, someone asked why I stayed as long as I did. I considered the question carefully. Because systems like his don't expose themselves to strangers, I said. They only reveal themselves to people they believe belong. That went into the record. I made sure of it. When it was over, I walked outside alone. No press, no cameras, just air. This was not victory. This was alignment. And alignment is irreversible. Somewhere, in an office far above the city, a man who had spent his life controlling outcomes was realizing something too late. He had taught me everything I needed to dismantle him. He just assumed I'd never turn the lesson outward. Power never collapses all at once. It splinters. Quietly, embarrassingly. In places no one bothered to reinforce. The first fracture showed up in his calendar. Meetings canceled without explanation. Standing invitations suddenly rescheduled. People who once rearranged flights to sit near him now claimed conflicts they didn't bother to disguise. Availability is a currency. When it dries up, you know the market has shifted. The board commissioned an independent review. Independent is the word organizations use when they're trying to survive the outcome. I wasn't named in the announcement. That omission was deliberate. They wanted distance. They wanted to pretend this wasn't personal. They were wrong. Everything about this was personal, just not emotional. My husband tried one last time. He showed up at my door without warning. No lawyers, no posture, just a man who had finally realized neutrality doesn't protect cowards. "You've made your point," he said. "This is going too far." I didn't invite him in. "You think this is about you?" I asked. He flinched. That was new. "This is about a system you benefited from and never questioned. I'm not taking it down for spite. I'm stepping out of its way while it collapses." He looked at me like I was someone he didn't recognize. Good. Recognition is overrated. The independent review turned up what reviews always turn up when they're actually allowed to work. Patterns. Not crimes, yet. But patterns that demanded explanation. And explanations that required testimony. And testimony that created exposure. Exposure is contagious. Executives began retaining their own counsel. Not the company's. Theirs. That's when you know loyalty has expired. A journalist called me. Careful, respectful, prepared. "I'm not asking for comment," she said. "I'm asking for confirmation." I gave her neither. "I don't participate in narratives," I said. "I participate in records." She paused. Then off the record, she said quietly, "Is it as bad as it looks?" I answered honestly. "It's worse. You're only seeing what survived legal review." She thanked me and hung up. That article ran 2 weeks later. Measured, relentless, impossible to dismiss. He was mentioned, but not centered. That was devastating. Men like him don't fear condemnation. They fear irrelevance. Donors began calling the foundation. Some withdrew quietly, others loudly. A few demanded audits before releasing pledged funds. Philanthropy depends on trust. Trust dissolves faster than markets. He issued a statement. I read it once and recognized it immediately. Deflection masquerading as transparency. He blamed legacy systems. Isolated procedural oversights. Bad actors. He did not take responsibility. He never had. That refusal would cost him more than any single violation. One of the 22 testified. Not against him directly, against process, against culture, against the unspoken rules everyone was expected to follow. She was calm, precise, unshakable. Watching her, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pride. Not because she was brave, but because she was finished being compliant. The first resignation at the top came on a Friday. People always resign on Fridays when they're trying to control the weekend narrative. It didn't work. By Monday, analysts were asking questions no PR firm could reframe. Shareholders began demanding explanations instead of reassurances. Money is patient. Investors are not. He stopped being invited to speak. Panels replaced him quietly. Galas adjusted seating charts. His name was removed from programs without ceremony. That kind of erasure hurts more than headlines. It says, you are no longer necessary. I received another offer to settle the divorce. Higher this time. Urgent. I declined again. They wanted closure. I wanted distance. There's a difference. Late one night, I reread something he once said to me years ago, when I was still trying to earn his approval. People don't fall from the top, he'd said. They step down one compromise at a time. He was right. He just never imagined I'd be the one counting the steps. There is a phase in every collapse where denial becomes aggressive. That's where he was now. He stopped pretending nothing was wrong and started pretending everything was under control. The difference is subtle but fatal. One is silence, the other is performance. He gave interviews. Not many, just enough to reassure the people who still wanted reassurance. He spoke about resilience, about leadership under pressure, about weathering unfounded narratives. He never said my name. That omission was deliberate. Men like him believe that naming a woman gives her weight. He was wrong. The independent review finished sooner than expected. That should have worried him. Reviews end early for two reasons: obstruction or clarity. This was clarity. The board didn't release the full findings. They never do. They released a summary, carefully worded, legally cautious, still devastating. Material governance failures, inadequate oversight, systemic ethical risk. Translation: we can't protect him anymore. He was asked to step aside temporarily. That word does so much work in power circles. It implies return. It promises continuity. No one believed it. Temporary exile is still exile. I found out the same way I'd found out everything else, through someone who couldn't stay quiet anymore. It's happening, they said. They're distancing themselves. I thanked them and went back to what I was doing. Momentum doesn't need applause. My husband withdrew his latest divorce offer. Not out of pride, out of fear. Association had become a liability. I didn't feel satisfaction when I heard that. I felt confirmation. He had chosen safety over integrity every time. This was just the most expensive version of that habit. Some people only learn when cowardice costs more than courage. The regulators coordinated. That's when things accelerated. Multiple agencies, shared findings, aligned timelines, information flowing without obstruction. Systems protect themselves until they don't. Then they cannibalize. He was no longer the center of gravity. He was the risk. I was advised, kindly, to lay low. That advice always comes when outcomes are no longer in question. When people want to prevent complications, not seek truth. I listened. Then I ignored it. Not publicly, strategically. I continued cooperating, continued documenting, continued showing up when asked. Visibility wasn't the point. Reliability was. One of his longtime allies broke ranks. Not dramatically, not publicly. He just stopped answering calls. That silence echoed louder than betrayal ever could. Another ally demanded indemnification before continuing support. Another asked for assurances that didn't exist. Trust doesn't shatter loudly. It thins. The press shifted tone. Early pieces had asked if something was wrong. Now they asked how long it had been wrong. That's the pivot that ends careers. I received a message from someone inside his legal team. Short. Anonymous. He didn't think you'd go this far. I stared at it longer than necessary. Far enough for what? Truth doesn't measure distance the way power does. The foundation froze disbursements. Officially, it was under review. Unofficially, it was hemorrhaging credibility. Beneficiaries suffered. That part mattered to me. I documented it too. Harm doesn't disappear just because its source wears tailored suits. That documentation changed the tone of the investigation. Intent is debatable. Impact is not. Late one evening, I opened a folder I hadn't touched in months. Notes from years ago. Conversations I'd dismissed at the time as unsettling but survivable. Moments where my instincts had whispered and I'd chosen diplomacy instead. I didn't feel regret. I felt clarity. Survival sometimes requires silence. Justice requires memory. The call came on a Sunday morning. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Almost. "This is his attorney," the voice said. Tired, controlled, fractured around the edges. "He wants to resolve this." Resolve. Another word that does heavy lifting. "There's nothing to resolve," I said. There was a pause. "He's prepared to make significant concessions." "I'm not negotiating with consequences," I replied. "I'm cooperating with process." The line went quiet. Then, "You understand this will end him." I considered that. "Yes," I said. "That's what accountability does." After the call, I stood in my kitchen and let the silence settle. This was the point of no return, not because I'd chosen destruction, but because the system had chosen exposure. I hadn't pushed it. I'd simply refused to protect it. And that refusal was enough. The public thinks downfall is loud. Sirens, headlines, cameras flashing while a powerful man shields his face with a hand that once signed checks like commandments. That's fantasy. Real collapse is administrative. It happens in offices with bad coffee and better lawyers. It happens in language so dull it sounds merciful. It happens when someone says effective immediately and means you are finished. The board vote wasn't unanimous. That detail matters. Power never leaves without a few loyalists clinging to the myth that proximity will save them. But unanimity isn't required when thresholds are crossed. He was removed as CEO pending final determinations. Another soft phrase. Another illusion of dignity. His access was revoked before the announcement went live. Email, building, accounts. I know because one of the systems flagged it, and someone forwarded me the timestamp. 12:07 a.m. They did it after midnight to reduce volatility. Even in disgrace, he was managed like a market risk. The press release hit at 6:30 a.m. By 6:31, his name was trending. Not with outrage, with confusion. Confusion is lethal to reputations built on certainty. People don't know how to defend what they don't understand. My phone lit up. Journalists, former colleagues, distant acquaintances who suddenly remembered my name. I answered none of them. I had already said everything that mattered, to people with badges, authority, and time. The rest was noise. My husband texted. One sentence. I didn't think it would end like this. I stared at it longer than I should have. Then I deleted it. Men like him always believe there's an ending where they remain intact, where consequences are surgical, where collapse stops just short of their own comfort. That belief is how they enable men like his father. The investigations didn't stop with his removal. They accelerated. Now there were incentives. New leadership cooperated enthusiastically. Files appeared that had been unavailable for years. Memory improved across departments. Integrity is amazing once self-preservation kicks in. The foundation was dissolved, not rebranded, not restructured, dissolved. Assets frozen, operations halted, donors notified. That hurt him more than losing the company. The foundation was how he laundered his legacy. Without it, all that remained was math. I was asked, again, to speak publicly. This time, the request came from a journalist whose work I respected, someone who understood restraint. I agreed to one condition: no portrait photos, no hero framing, no redemption arc, just facts. The piece ran under a neutral headline, no adjectives, no dramatics. It didn't mention me until the 4th paragraph. That positioning was intentional. This story was never about my pain. It was about his patterns. He issued a statement of his own. Short, defensive, vaguely apologetic without admitting anything. He blamed complexity, misinterpretation, overzealous oversight. He did not apologize to employees. He did not mention the harm. That was the final confirmation of who he'd always been. Charges followed, not all at once, not in a dramatic sweep, but they came. Civil first, then criminal referrals. White-collar accountability is a marathon, not a sprint. I was prepared. The night it became undeniable, when even his most loyal defenders stopped defending, I poured myself a glass of water and sat in the dark. No music, no celebration, just stillness. I thought I would feel triumph. I didn't. I felt release. There's a difference. Triumph is about winning. Release is about no longer carrying what was never yours to begin with. People like to ask what it cost me. Marriage, career, stability, years of proximity to something corrosive. They ask if it was worth it. That question misunderstands everything. I didn't choose this to win. I chose it because silence had become complicity. Because patience, when paired with truth, becomes leverage. Because I refused to let a powerful man teach me lessons he never intended me to use. He is no longer a billionaire CEO. That phrase belongs to the past now. He is a case study, a cautionary footnote, a man who confused control with permanence. And I am no longer his daughter-in-law. I am something far more dangerous to men like him. I am proof. After the fall, there is paperwork. That's the part no one writes about. Not the hearings, not the headlines, not the carefully worded phrases like historic reckoning or long overdue accountability. Those are for people who need distance from reality. Reality comes in envelopes, certified mail, court notices, requests for clarification, forms that ask you to restate truths already documented 3 times. This is where systems finish chewing what they've already swallowed. I resigned nothing. That detail matters. I didn't move on. I didn't pivot to something shinier. I didn't reinvent myself for public consumption. I waited. Because waiting, after action, is discipline, not paralysis. My divorce finalized quietly. No courtroom drama, no moral victory speeches, just signatures and separation. My husband didn't contest the final terms. He couldn't afford to. Not financially, reputationally. Association is expensive once power loses its shine. When I signed the last page, I felt nothing. No grief, no relief, just completion. That marriage had ended long before paperwork acknowledged it. People began to reach out with confessions. Not apologies, confessions. I should have said something. I knew it was wrong. I thought someone else would handle it. I listened. Then I let the silence answer for me. Remorse that arrives only after safety is not remorse. It's self-preservation. I didn't correct them. I didn't absolve them. I simply stopped carrying their unfinished courage. The company survived. That surprises people. They want collapse to be total. They want scorched earth. They want villains to take entire systems down with them. That's not how accountability works. The company survived because it had to. Thousands of people depended on it. Survival was part of repair. But it was smaller, humbled, watched, and it would never again be run the way it had been. That mattered more than destruction. The regulators closed my file, not with gratitude, not with ceremony, with efficiency. "You're no longer needed," one of them said. That was the highest compliment. It meant the truth no longer required a witness. I took a job 6 months later. Not a promotion, not a step down, a lateral move with clean lines and clearer values. The CEO asked me one question in the interview. "What would you do if you saw something wrong here?" I answered without hesitation. "I'd document it. Then I'd ask if you want to fix it or be exposed by it." He hired me on the spot. I don't attend industry events anymore. Not because I'm afraid, because proximity to spectacle dulls judgment. I prefer rooms where people work, not perform. Occasionally, someone asks if I regret not speaking sooner. I tell them the truth. No. Speaking early would have ended me. Speaking precisely ended the problem. Timing is not cowardice. It's strategy. His name still appears sometimes, in articles, in court documents, in conversations where people lower their voices out of habit. But it no longer carries authority, only history. That's the difference between power and legacy. One commands, the other explains. I don't follow his case closely now. I don't need to. Justice doesn't require obsession. It requires boundaries. And I have very good ones. What I gained wasn't victory. It was alignment between what I knew, what I tolerated, and what I refused to protect anymore. That alignment is permanent, and it is worth more than any title I lost. After everything settles, people expect transformation to announce itself. They look for reinvention, new hair, new city, new language for the same ambition. They want proof that suffering produced spectacle. I didn't give them that. I kept my life deliberately ordinary. That, more than anything, unsettled them. Power trains us to believe significance must be visible. That if you're not climbing, you're failing. If you're not expanding, you're wasting potential. That belief serves systems, not people. I stopped explaining my choices. Explanation is a habit learned in captivity. I stayed in the same apartment for a year after it all ended. Same grocery store, same walking route, same quiet mornings where no one recognized me as anything other than a woman buying coffee. Fame is another form of surveillance. I had had enough of being watched. Sometimes I replay the boardroom in my mind. Not the firing, the moment before. The look he gave me when he thought I was contained, when he believed proximity equaled obedience. That look taught me something invaluable. Power assumes compliance by default. It does not plan for refusal. The 22 dispersed. Some moved on quietly, some became leaders, some burned out and left the industry altogether. We don't meet as a group. Shared trauma doesn't require permanence. What mattered was the choice they made when it counted. Loyalty isn't about staying. It's about leaving together. I was invited to speak at a university once. Ethics, governance, leadership. I declined the keynote and asked instead for a closed seminar with students who had questions, but no microphones. One of them asked, "How did you know when to act?" I answered honestly, "When silence started to cost more than consequence." That's the moment everyone recognizes, if they're paying attention. Another asked if I was afraid. "Yes," I said, "constantly." Fear isn't weakness, it's information. The mistake is letting it make decisions for you. I don't mentor young women the way people expect. I don't tell them to lean in, or fight harder, or be nicer to survive male systems. I tell them to learn documentation. I tell them to understand incentives. I tell them to watch who benefits from their silence. That advice has no hashtag, but it works. Occasionally, I dream about him, not as he is now, as he was then, confident, controlled, convinced of his permanence. In the dream, he's speaking, but no one is listening. I wake up calm. Dreams are the mind closing old files. People still ask if I feel sorry for him. That question reveals more about them than about me. Pity assumes equality of risk. We were never equals. He wielded power irresponsibly. I withdrew consent to be harmed by it. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. What remains is not bitterness. It's precision in my boundaries, in my language, in my tolerance for bullshit dressed as brilliance. I don't raise my voice. I don't need to. Men like him taught me that volume is what you use when substance fails. If there's a lesson in all of this, and people always want lessons, it's not about revenge. It's about refusal. Refusing to disappear quietly. Refusing to protect what harms others. Refusing to confuse patience with passivity. I waited, then I moved. And when I did, the system did the rest. There is no epilogue in real life. Only a final reckoning with yourself. People expect closure to feel like a door slamming shut, like justice tying a clean knot around chaos. It doesn't. It feels like standing in a room after everyone has left and realizing the air is finally yours again. The last legal filing landed on a Tuesday. Unremarkable. Procedural. Dense with language designed to survive appeal. It marked the end of my involvement. Not his case, not the consequences, just my role as a witness. I signed, I scanned, I sent, then I closed the folder. That was it. No speech, no pause, no sense of ceremony. The end of something rarely announces itself when you've already let go. He was sentenced months later, not publicly enough to satisfy spectators, not lightly enough to comfort defenders. Enough. Enough to end his control. Enough to mark his name permanently. Enough to ensure he would never again mistake wealth for immunity. I didn't attend. Justice doesn't require an audience, especially not the one it once denied. People still frame my story as revenge. They say I was wronged, that I fought back, that I won, that framing flatters ego but misses truth. I didn't act because I was hurt. I acted because I was done pretending harm was tolerable if it wore the right suit. Victims wait for permission. I took responsibility. There's a difference. Here's the part no one expects. I don't feel powerful. I feel free. Power is reactive. It needs opposition. It feeds on attention. Freedom is quiet. Freedom is choosing your own pace, your own language, your own thresholds for engagement. Freedom is never again needing approval from men who confuse fear with respect. I keep one thing from that life: a notebook. Not evidence, not records, not leverage, just notes, observations, patterns, small truths written when I still thought survival meant adaptation. I read it sometimes, not with anger, with recognition. That woman was learning. She just didn't know what she was preparing for yet. If you're listening to this story hoping for vindication, let me be clear. Vindication is external. What matters is alignment. The moment your values, your actions, and your silence, or refusal of it, finally agree. That moment changes everything. I don't chase justice anymore. I don't have to. Once you've seen how systems fall, not from outrage, but from exposure, you understand something irreversible. Nothing that relies on silence is stable. Nothing that fears daylight survives it. So this is how it ends. Not with triumph, not with bitterness, not with applause, but with a woman standing exactly where she chose to stand, unafraid, unowned, and finished explaining herself. That is not revenge. That is accounting. And the books are finally closed.